Hi, and welcome to our presentation today called Coaching into Backwards Design. My name is Samantha Shields, and I'm an instructional coach in Round Rock ISD. I am super excited to be here with you and be able to share this knowledge with you and this learning that I've stumbled upon through the time that I've been a teacher, but also as an instructional coach. I know that being able to do backwards design is not easy in itself. It has lots of components and lots of ways that it can be done. But I also know and have learned that coaching into backwards design and being able to support teams through the process without giving them the answers all the time is another craft and skill in itself. And so I really wanted to come here to you today and be able to share with you some things I have learned along the way that have helped me better coach teams into backwards design. So let's get started. Again, my name is Samantha Shields. I'm an instructional coach in Round Rock ISD. My goal is not only to be able to coach teachers, but also to be able to coach coaches and be able to support coaches in our work, because our work is not easy and it's different, and being able to share with each other things that we've learned along the way is something that I look forward to being able to do, and what has brought me here to you today. Before we get into the learning targets of today's session, I wanted to start by prefacing and starting with a little bit of a background story to get you into the presentation. When I was a classroom teacher, I still don't know if I was doing it right when it came to planning instruction. College did not give any direction when it came to planning, whether it be unit planning, weekly planning, nor did it provide any information really into what standards were and what SEs are. I remember sitting in a meeting for the first time and my principal saying, what was the SE? And in my head, I'm like, what's an SE? When I started on my first campus, I just started doing what the team had always been doing, and I felt that that was how it was supposed to be done. And at that time, we were weekly planning. And then my first year as an instructional coach, I was learning the new position. I was learning a new campus, a new district, an abundance of new resources that were coming my way. The big buzzword on the campuses was backwards design. And y'all know when y'all hear an acronym or something and you're like, I don't know what that is. And so then you have to run and Google it so that you don't look like you don't know what it is. That was me when it came to backwards design. So I started Googling it and I realized I had my work cut out for me when it came to learning my coaching role and all of the things that came with being a coach, but also learning backwards design and coaching teams through backwards design. And so that is what has brought me here to you today. I wanted to share with you that learning that I have gained along the way when it came to backwards design and coaching teams through it. So for our learning targets of today, by the end of the session, my goals for you would be that you would have gained a general understanding of the backwards design process. General understanding. The focus of this session is not to teach you how to backwards design, but I will use those steps to show you how to coach into those steps. I also, by the end of this session, you would have determined the coaching skills and traits that it takes to coach teams through backwards design. And you would have gained an understanding of what strategic questioning can be used when guiding teachers through the backwards design process. It's all about the questioning, guys, and so that's what we're really going to focus on here today. So before we begin, I wanted to give you some time to virtually talk and kind of see what each other, what you're bringing into this session. So my prompts that I'll have for you are, what does the planning process look like for your teams? I know it's been a little bit since we've been there, but think back. What has that process look like for your teams generally? What did your role as a coach look like and sound like during these collaborative planning conversations? Because each of our roles looks different based on the campuses and districts that we're in. And what is an area that you hope to grow in as a coach within backwards design or coaching into backwards design? And what I would like you to do is, on your screen here, I'm gonna move that over, there's a flip grid, and if you click that flip grid, it'll take you to our Flipgrid board here, which is coaching into backwards design. And so right here it says, think back to your recent school year. What did the planning process look like for your teams? What did your role as a coach look like and sound like during these collaborative planning conversations? And what is an area you hope to grow in as a coach within backwards design or coaching into backwards design? And so here you can click this and you can record your responses, and then you can also reply to people who are also in our session. Okay, once you've done that, come on back. And I have a little clip art here for you for some humor as we transition into the next step. So backwards design mapping the path to learning. And so here it says, I taught Stripe how to whistle. I didn't hear him whistling. I said I taught him. I didn't say he learned it. I want you to think about that for a second and what that means in relation to backwards design. So right here, it's saying he taught it, but he didn't learn it. He's not understanding it. And so this is a good segue into our next slide. So why backwards design? I have a quote here from Stephen Convey. It says, to begin with the end in mind means to start with a clear understanding of your destination. It means to know where you're going so that you better understand where you are, so that the steps you take are always in the right direction. So his quote helps us see why, when planning our units and learning for students, we would start the process by thinking about where we are going so that we can better understand how to get there and what steps to take. In Understanding by Design, it says we want students to understand opposed to merely take in and recall. When teaching students, we want them to gain understanding that will go beyond the unit of learning, and that they will be able to apply and transfer in an array of disciplines and situations. We don't want students to just recall information so that they can pass an assessment or show us that they got it for a few days. We want them to really understand and get meaning from it. So here is something I've put together here that helps me remember the 3 main steps of the backwards design process from Understanding by Design. Now, within each of these steps is several miniature steps, right? So it's not just a 3-step process per se. In this process, educators begin by actually thinking about the end of the unit and the results we desire for the students first. Now, I'm going to be really honest, guys. When I was a teacher, I didn't always do that. I thought about those activities that I wanted, and I started sticking them in there and then hoped that it all came together. Within backwards design, teachers dig deep into the standards of the unit to have a better understanding of what students need to know and be able to do. Teachers design and think about the assessments and the evidence that will be acceptable at the end of the unit before they even think about what activities and learning experiences they will provide students. When using the backwards design process, the ultimate goal, again, is student understanding. We seek to make sure that we as educators have a deeper grasp of the learning that we want our students to obtain, so that we can provide experience for our students that will give them an overall understanding that goes beyond students just taking in information and recalling it for an assessment. By doing this work, teams of teachers, they'll dig deeper into understanding the standards and discussing what it really looks like for students to be proficient and determining all the learning that goes into each standard. Team members will be able to build consensus around the desired learning outcomes, which by doing so will enable students to have a better chance of reaching the same endpoint of proficiency as other students within the grade level and in other teachers' classrooms. This consensus will help alleviate different interpretations from teammate to teammate about what students must be able to do and show as evidence of mastery of the standards, giving students a more equitable learning experience. I really like that point, because as teachers, if we have a different interpretation of what the standard means or what proficiency looks like, we demand different things from our students. And so when teachers really go through this backwards design process, they come to that consensus and they have that understanding so that everyone's on the same page. So right here is a roadmap or planning roadmap. And I'll be honest, I'm not sure where this idea of creating a roadmap of the backwards design process originated, but where I saw it was a colleague of mine. She's a secondary coach here in Round Rock ISD. she often has this way of taking notes where it's all in her drawings. That's her way of capturing her learning. And so I once stumbled upon a roadmap that she had drawn of the backwards design process that she had drawn when she was in a professional development. And so she showed it to me when she was training me on backwards design and kind of giving me her training on it. This right here is actually a modified version of hers. I adapted it a little bit and added a couple of little pieces to it, but it's still similar. And you will notice on the roadmap here that there's the team, but then there's also an instructional coach here. For the instructional coach, I have put these little green areas. Those are basically where along the way within those steps, that's where we are focusing today, how we're embedding coaching support in there for our teachers when they're going through this process. For the 3 main steps, again, I've color coded them so you can see there's the first step that's blue, and that's where you start first. That's determining your desired results of the unit. And so within each of those steps, there's bullet pointed steps. So that one, they look at assessment analysis and creation. And then there's a deep study of the TEKS and the unit. And there's an arrow there. And I want to put that disclaimer because some grade levels, like 3 through 5 or 3 through 12, you have previous assessments, you have STAR assessments, the IQs, you have all of those things that you can look at and really dissect to figure out the learning that goes into the standards. And so a lot of times teams will start with that. They'll dig deep into the assessment portion first, and then jump into a deep understanding of the TEKS and unit. And I have there that arrow because K through 2 may not have all of those assessments, and so they may start with doing the deep study of the units and the TEKS first. Within that, you have looking at your essential questions, your rationale, big ideas, vocabulary, misconceptions, and then unpacking the TEKS. Unpacking the TEKS is where you really kind of take those standards and break it up into individual learning targets so that you can really see all the learning that truly goes into each standard. From there, you have your yellows, and that's your evidence of learning. So from here, this is where you pace out your unit. This is where you decide when it's going to start and when it's going to end. When are you going to give the summative assessment? You as a team talk about your planning timeline. When are y'all going to start planning this unit? When do you want this unit to be done planning? So that you kind of have that understanding together. You come back, you talk about when are we going to bring that summative assessment data back to a PLC to review so that we can, be responsive to instruction. You map out when you may want to put your formative assessment checkpoints in there. Learning targets. This is where you can translate your learning targets that you already did from unpacking the TEKS into student friendly so that they are better able to understand their learning outcomes. And you map those out throughout your unit. Then you do your success criteria, performance of understanding, if that's something that your district is doing. And then the final step is learning experiences and instruction. And so once you have given yourself that deep, rich understanding of the unit, you've talked about your assessments, you've designed your assessments, you've paced out your unit. Now you go in and you put activities and strategies that will match the learning targets that you have. Whereas before, as a teacher, I would always do it in reverse. And so what I want you to do now is I want you to pause this video for a second and think about your planning process that you have with your teachers or that your teachers do, and draw it out. Use what you know. There's no right or wrong way. We all have our own processes of how we do things. And so draw your map out of the steps. And then I would like you to come over here to our little Padlet. And in your participant handout, you do have the link for that. And right here it says coaching roadmaps. Draw your own coaching roadmap that represents the steps that your teams typically take. After you draw your map, take a picture of it and post it here. And so this would be a good place where you can post your picture and let others see the processes that you go on and that you take with your teams. And then you can like it, comment, and reply to each other as well. Okay, now we're going to move on into our second learning target, which was talking about the coaching traits and skills it takes to coach teams through backwards design. And so as I'm thinking of coaching skills, of course, Grease came up when he was saying, I got chills, they're multiplying. Well, we got skills, they're multiplying. And so in our role, we have to obtain certain skills and traits just to be able to coach teachers generally. But when we're coaching into backwards design, a couple of things I've learned on the way and I've had to adapt along the way and grow in were some of these skills that I wanted to share with them or share them with you. So for a coach to be successful in coaching teams through backwards design, they may exhibit the ability to be inquisitive. So they're able to ask wondering questions or strategic questions at the right time in order to build capacity in their teachers and to empower them to find answers within themselves. You know, we don't always want to give the answers to them. So you want to empower them and be curious and start asking probing questions so that they can dig that answer back out of themselves. You know, when I was younger, I used to think that my trait of being nosy was going to be a bad thing when I grew older, but because I would always ask questions and I was always like nosy in people's business. But as I've grown into a coach, I've come to realize that that skill or trait is actually a good thing because it has helped me better ask questions when I'm supporting my teams. A coaching skill might be very purposeful. You make purposeful moves at the right times, and you try to be one step ahead of the teachers in order to be able to anticipate misconceptions and be able to help steer them in the right direction. You need to be knowledgeable in backwards design. Being able to support teachers through this process and components in depth, being knowledgeable in the process, that's going to be helpful for you. Notice it says knowledgeable in backwards design. When I first started as a coach, I only had teaching experience in kindergarten and first grade. And that was an area that I was very insecure about telling people because people have this understanding that when you're a coach, you're supposed to come with grade level experience across the board. And that's not typical in all of us. And so when you're a coach, you may not have grade level experience in every grade level, but you have knowledge of best practices. You have knowledge of teaching practices, you have knowledge, pedagogy, you have everything. And so if a coach understands backwards design and good teaching, they're able to support teams, right? And you can learn things along with them, which is actually a really good thing. A coach needs to be flexible. The more you allow teachers to personalize their design and their process in this backwards design, the more buy-in you're going to receive from them. You know, try not to come in with a fixed mindset saying that this is how it has to be done. That roadmap, it does not have to be done that way. You maneuver, you tweak it, you make it work for you. You know, and so you want to be flexible for them to help find what works and what works for you as well, but what works for your teams. A coach needs to be patient. Every teacher will develop their understanding of backwards design at their own pace. Give teachers that grace, give them that space to be vulnerable in that learning process. We all begin our learning process somewhere, right? And so teachers need to feel that they're not being judged in the learning. They need to feel comfortable to say that they don't understand something. And so that they're able to ask you those clarifying questions. One more thing, to extend on being patient, there is ample value in teachers doing the work. As a coach, it is easy for all of us to tell them what to do or offer to do the work for them. But if you as a coach choose to offer something for them or for the teachers, you need to make sure you kind of preface that I want to do it with you, like we're co-planning, because you want them to see the thinking process that you go through, and you want them to hear the moves you make and why you make it during this process. So within the same learning target here, it says why strategic questioning, and I love this little GIF over here. I kind of create this one. So why strategic questioning? As we stated in the previous slide, being inquisitive and being curious is a helpful trait and skill, but you might be wondering why. A coach may not have the content knowledge again for the grade level that they're supporting, but that does not matter. If a coach can use specific guiding questions at the right times and it can help prompt teachers to have a deeper understanding and dig a deeper thinking. Here's the first quote I found. It says, strategic questioning is a skill of asking questions that will make a difference. That is true. If we can ask the right questions at the right time in the process, we can help teachers discover that they already know the knowledge, that they already have that in there. And so you can make that difference with the teachers. My second quote here that I like, it says, strategic questioning requires a special type of question and a special type of listening. Yes, listening. That was one of the traits that was really hard for me for a while. If we are not listening to those collaborative conversations that teachers are having, we won't know what to ask and when to ask it. And we will waste teachers' time and run the risk of spinning them around in circles where we're trying to catch up on things that they've already discussed. So you need to make sure we're listening, and we need to make sure that we're asking questions at the right time. And so strategic questioning is a way to engage those and challenge a person's thinking. And so it's a good thing. And so now, with all that being said, we can move into our real main focus of today. So what would strategic questioning sound like during the first step of backwards design, which is desired results? And so I did not create this visual. This visual has been adapted in my school district. And so it has right here a deep study of the unit, and then summative assessment and analysis or creation for the desired results. And so what we're going to do now is I'm going to show you a protocol that I've again adapted from within my district, and I added some strategic questions that you can ask during that part of the process to help coach teams through it. And so right here I have a K through 2 protocol and a 3 through 12 protocol. They are the exact same thing. The only part is on one little area. Let me show you right here. One little area, it's going to show a different, in the step 2, it's going to have one little thing that's slightly different, but everything else is the exact same. And so for step number 1, desired results, and this is going to be, this is available for you to download within your participant handouts. So it tells you the components of that step, so things that could take place during that time. Notice I said could. Everybody does it different. And right here, 1 through 18, or I'm going to read you a couple of them, but there's some questions that you can use to coach a team through that step. And so again, you're trying to really get the team to find that understanding themselves, because I could easily say, here's your focus teak. Here is what the students need to be able to do. But you want to guide teachers to finding that understanding themselves, because you want to build that capacity in them to be able to do it when you're not around. And so a couple of the questions here say, what should students know, understand, and be able to do by the end of this unit? That's your first PLC question right there. They really need to understand, what do the kids need to know and be able to do at the end of this unit? What's your overall goal? Number 2, what standards, knowledge, skills, or pieces of information are important for all students to know and be able to do? So think of those little pieces. That's where, when you unpack your learning targets, that comes in, because one standard has multiple learning targets within it. And so if they unpack those, they know those little pieces that go into it. Number 3, what are the core ideas that students should understand and that should say apply during and long after this unit? So you want them to take this understanding beyond the unit and not just today. And what is that ultimate transfer we seek as a result of this unit? How are they going to take this information and transfer it and apply it elsewhere? So as you see, these questions for you to have are going to give you some ways to help support teams during that time. Some guiding questions that you can use to prompt their thinking. Those thought-provoking questions are what's going to help a teacher and build capacity within that teacher so that they can really have a good grasp of the learning that they want their students to have. Within that same initial step of the backwards design, they also look at summative assessment, analysis, and creation. So some things that could occur here, they could be pulling up their STAR IQ and looking at some of those questions and deciding what learning is needed for those type of questions. What do they need to make sure the kids understand? They might look up and bring up their previous unit assessments or summative assessments and go through it. What learning did our students have to have? What needs to be added? What needs to be taken away and changed? They determine their priority teak. So these are just some things that will happen during that step. And here's a few questions for that. So again, they could be doing an assessment analysis of a previous unit assessment. How many questions were used in the past to assess the skills? Did the questions provide a valid opportunity to gauge student understanding? Do we need to adjust or add questions? So on and so forth there. Number 2, what knowledge or learning is needed for students to be able to successfully perform on the summative assessment questions? How will we know if students achieve the desired result? So right here, you're really looking for that. How are you going to know if they learned it part? Okay, so that's like your second question. How will we know if students learned it on your PLC questions? So I'm going to hop back over here to our presentation. So now we're going to say, so what would strategic questioning sound like during evidence of learning? So this is where they're pacing their unit out, doing their learning target, success criteria. So again, I'm going to go back over here. But this time I'm going to go scroll down, and I'm going into the yellow because this is the second part on our roadmap. Okay, so here's your pacing. So again, things that could happen here. Your team might need to figure out their planning timeline for the unit. When are they going to bring the data back to PLC? Determine pacing for the unit map timeline. What's the start and end date of this unit? Map the TEKS to create a calendar. I love this one. So you look at your TEKS and you kind of pace them out across the unit and say, how many days are we going to spend on this, standard? How many days are we going to spend on that? And so you really kind of build your map of the TEKS. Schedule out your assessment, because and then you note when you might need to have the summative assessment taken and done and put in your gradebook system so that everyone's kind of on the page there. And so here's some guiding questions. What will be the beginning and ending dates of the unit to be taught? What will the window of time be that we want all teachers to have administered the summative assessment? Because you want to make sure it's equitable. You don't want some classes to get extra time that the others didn't to learn the material. And so you all kind of want to have a window of time that this would be given to students. And then you have further down, you have your formative assessment creation and learning targets that could take place during this time. So this is where you've kind of unpacked your TEKS possibly, and so you can translate those into student-friendly learning targets and then have them match that pacing that you've created with your TEKS calendar. And if your district does success criteria and performance of understanding, you might work those out at that time. And then ask each other, where are we going to put in certain check for understandings or formative assessments? Where would we want to make sure that students accomplish certain understanding? Again, so here's some guiding questions for you. Do the unpacked learning targets need to be translated into student-friendly language to assure understanding of their learning outcomes? You want them to know what their learning is that day and understand it. How can we map out the TEKS onto a unit calendar for appropriate pacing? How can we map out the translated learning targets to go with the TEKS map? And what will success criteria and performance of understanding be for the learning targets? Okay, now we're going to go into the final step. So what would strategic questioning look or sound like for determining our learning experiences and instruction? So this is where the teachers finally get to decide how they're going to teach what the students are going to learn. And so for this one on your handout, I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to go to my orange. So right here, create your daily lesson plans. This is where they can decide what activities are we going to use, what strategies are we going to use, what experiences are you going to give the kids or the students so that they can learn the understanding. So some of the guiding questions you could have is, what activities and strategies are best suited to accomplish the desired learning outcomes for students? What experiences or learning methods would provide students with a greater understanding? How will we support learners as they come to understand important ideas and processes? One of these, number 5, is one of my favorites. What experiences can we provide students to show the relevance of the learning? So that's the good question, to where you want students to really understand this learning and how it's going to be relevant to them outside of this classroom. And so if they're learning about coins, why is that important for them? What experience during that unit can you give them so that they can better understand how it's going to benefit them outside of this unit and as an adult or as a growing child? So that question I love, because then that helps you integrate other content areas within it, which leads you to number 6. How can this learning be integrated across contents and disciplines? So bring it in, you don't have to teach everything in silos. And so how can you kind of bring it together for those students? And then the bottom part here is responsive teaching throughout the unit. And so these are some questions that you might ask and need when students don't learn it, or when you're looking at that formative assessment data checkpoint. So what does the data show? What adjustments should be made to the unit pacing? How should we adjust the plan instruction to support student needs? Because even though you've created a map of your unit, you have to sometimes pause that unit and adjust it based on your students' data. And so that's where those checkpoints come in, and it's a live document. Your unit is not set in stone. You adjust it. If your audience, your students doesn't get it, you go back and you rework it. After y'all do the summative assessment, do keep some time when you're creating that unit map. Don't give your unit assessment right at the end. Do it a little bit of time before, so that you have some time within that unit to be responsive to your students. You don't just want to be like, oh, they didn't get it, next unit. You want to build in some time. What does the data show? How should we reteach, or what should that look like? How should we flex or strategically group our students? Then you have your reflection of the unit. Once the unit is finished, talk with the teams. What went well? What would we change? And then put those notes in there so that when they have to teach that unit again, they remember what worked and what didn't work. This is PLC question number 3 and 4. What are you going to do for students who don't learn it, and what are you going to do for students who do learn it? And so here's some questions to kind of guide you through that, so that y'all are better able to be responsive to those students and build groups for those students, so that they are still doing meaningful work. All right, so here's the collaborate and share. And what I have here is another Padlet for you. So when you click on the Padlet icon, it's going to take you to our other board. And the reason I have this one is because I wanted a space where you might have other questions that I can't think of, that you use, because we all think differently. And so if you have an additional question that could be helpful for each of us, so that we can learn from each other, which is the point of this presentation. This is our coaching craft. We learn from each other. Come in here and add that question, so that we are all able to add that onto our document and have that available to us. And so I would love if you could add some additional questions here, because I would love to continue growing and having more questions to support teams as well. All right, so here, some things to consider. And so I have here things that I also want you to think about as a coach, not just the backwards design part. And so when you're coaching, when I was doing this whole presentation, I could not help but go back to when I was a teacher and think about what it was like when other coaches or support staff would come into my team's PLCs. Sometimes we had people come in who didn't ask any questions and merely just looked at our work and pointed out all the things we were doing wrong. And that's not, how coaching should be when you're supporting teams with their planning process. It's when you come in that room, they're vulnerable when they let you in. And so, when that was happening, my teams and we would feel very judged. And sometimes we would just be sent around and around in circles, not getting anything done, which was, not using our time the best that it could. And so when teachers collaborate, they don't have that much time. And if people are coming into their planning and, they need to make sure that the time they have is being used effectively and efficiently. And so if we can ask questions and coach them the right way, then their time will be used efficiently and effectively. So I say this so that you think back to when you were a classroom teacher. What actions or skills did your coach portray that you appreciated that helped support your team? So what did they do? What were the moves they did that made that time effective and efficient? And if they didn't, how could you turn that around, and what would you like them to do? And so as you enter a team's planning time, be aware of this and how that felt for you as a teacher. One thing I've learned along the way is that it's helpful when you set the precedents up front and let teams know that as a coach, one thing that you're going to do in order to help them grow is to support their discussions is you're going to ask questions. You're going to ask them at specific times. And by letting teachers know this up front, it kind of alleviates the chance that teachers could think that you're questioning as a way to get, like, as an I got you, you don't know it kind of thing. And so, this happened to me once when I was having a conversation with teachers. So I asked those questions because I know they know the answers. And so when I was asking those questions, there was, it felt like it was an I got you kind of thing. And so, I had to go back and have that conversation with the teacher, and let her know that I had positive intent. And it went a long way. As coaches, let teachers know we ask questions to get more information. We want to be able to understand. I want to be able to bring about deeper thinking in that teacher. I want to build capacity and knowledge of my teachers. And I want to help my teachers find answers within themselves versus me just telling them. And half the time I may not have the answers anyway, but if I can ask the right questions, it'll help them get the answers as well. So always stay grounded to what you want in a coach when you were a teacher. And remember that you are still a teacher, but your audience has slightly changed. We partner with our teachers and we are equals with our teachers. None of us are above each other. We are still teachers. And I also want you to remember backwards design is beginning with the end in mind. And so again, teachers are going to adjust this model. It's a hybrid. You make it work for you, and it needs to be personal. It needs to be personalized. As long as you stay grounded to what backwards design is and beginning with the end in mind, personalize it, right? And so again, backwards design is not a linear process. You are going to move in and out of the different steps. It's not, okay, we're on step 1, step 2. It's not like that. You are going to be moving in and out of it. So it's not linear. Again, it's personalized. So again, if you want teachers to be invested in the process and you want them to own the work, they need to be able to make the version work for them. And you want to strategically question at the right time. So knowing how to ask the right questions at the right time is going to help your teams by far. And so that's what we need to remember. So that brings me to the end of our session. And one thing I do want to ask is for myself to grow as an instructional coach and as an educator, I would love if you could fill out my little exit survey here, just kind of letting me know what you learned, if this was at all helpful for your practice, and give areas of feedback for myself to grow and learn. And so if you click on my little thing here, it's going to take you to a survey that I adapted that I received at one of my Jim Knight Institute sessions, and it's an AEIOU evaluation and feedback. And so if you could submit that and give me some feedback so that I can grow, I would greatly appreciate it. And then here is my contact information. And so I have my email here. So if you wanted to get in touch with me, and I also have a link here to it's my coaching blog. I am starting it. It's still fresh, but I would love if you could subscribe to the mailing list. If you would like updates on what I'm posting for teachers and for coaches. And then you can also like the Facebook group as well so that we can be a community of coaches and grow with each other. And here are some things that I referenced in here within this presentation. Some of the things I got from Strategic Questioning, an approach of creating personal and social change. I found that. Understanding by Design by Wiggins and McTighe. And then the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Those were areas that I referenced within my presentation. I really hope that this was able to help you grow as a coach, and it was a good use of your time. And I thank you so much for joining me today.